Let's move on to chapter 11. Public goods and common resources. So we'll look at what are public goods, what are common resources, and we'll look at examples of these. And we'll see why do markets generally fail to provide the efficient amount of these goods. And how can the government improve market outcomes in the case of public goods or common resources. So this is usually the other sort of example of what we call traditionally market failure. But again, I'll remind you that it's actually not the failure of the market, but failure for having a market in the first place. So we consume a lot of things without paying. That's the problem. Well, do you pay to go to a park? No, right? You just walk in. Well, if it's a theme park, yeah, maybe you have to pay for a ticket to go in. But for a lot of parks, you go in, but you don't pay. National defense. Although there are claims that 非但不打台独 or no, but if you're protected, you're protected. I mean, national defense, you enjoy this, but we don't directly pay for national defense. Clean air and water, yeah, that's also something that we enjoy, but we do not really pay for clean air and water. And the problem here is that when there's no price, market forces cannot work, and so allocation of resources may not be efficient. So the private market may fail to provide the socially efficient amount of these goods. So one of the 10 principles of economics we learned in the first chapter is governments can sometimes improve market outcomes. So to learn what are these goods, we'll have to look at two characteristics of the goods. Excludability. People can be prevented from using a good. So for example, if I have fish in a private pond, I can say no fishing here, and so you can exclude people from consuming this. Or Wi-Fi access. You set a password, like Joseph's Wi-Fi access, do not use this or something. And then so you can exclude people from using this. What are examples of not excludable goods? Fish in the ocean. Well, the fish swim here and there. You cannot prevent other countries' fishermen from fishing these fish in the ocean. Or radio signals. Well, once the radio signal is broadcast, anybody who has a radio can listen to it freely, and they don't have to pay. Actually, if you notice, in the US, they have these public radios where they always have these donation campaigns because people are not paying for the programs that they listen to. So radio signals or fish in the ocean, these are not excludable. The other characteristic is rivalry in consumption. So does my use of this good affect your ability to use it? For example, if you buy a Moss rice burger, if I take a bite and give it to you, what happens? Well, your enjoyment of taking this rice burger is reduced compared to if I'm not taking a bite. So that means that a rice burger is rivalry in consumption. If I buy an iPad and use the iPad, then you cannot use the same iPad. Actually, I had this problem with my wife when both of us needed to record online courses because of the pandemic. Initially, I lended my iPad Pro to my wife, but very quickly I realized that there's rivalry in consumption, right? When she's recording the class, then I cannot record it. And so eventually we had to buy a second iPad to solve this problem. But that's a good example of having rivalry in consumption. What's non-rival? Well, if you download an app on iOS, that's not rival in consumption. It does not affect other people downloading the same app and enjoying it. Or if you download a MP4 file of Demon Slayer Hong Lianhua, the theme song, enjoying that music does not affect other people downloading the same song and enjoying music himself or herself. So those are what we call non-rival in consumption. So I'm not affected by other people's consumption of this. Okay, so depending on whether it's rival or not, or it's excludable or not, you can distinguish 4 kinds of goods. The first one is the normal one. It's the private goods. That's both excludable and rival in consumption. So for example, if I order a pizza, a slice of pizza is excludable because if I don't give it to you, then you cannot consume it. I can keep it, other people from consuming it, but it's rival in consumption as well. If I take a bite, then your enjoyment for this pizza would go down. I mean, most people will refuse to eat somebody else's pizza, so yeah. Okay, so that's private goods. But then the other extreme is what we call public goods. That's one of the main topics of this chapter, which is not excludable and not rival in consumption. For example, national defense. National defense, well, I cannot exclude people from national defense, because if national defense is there, if Taiwan's safe, everybody's safe. If Taiwan's not safe, everybody's not safe. I cannot say I'm going to exclude this person from consuming national defense. But also, national defense is not rival in consumption. It's not that if you are enjoying national defense, then my enjoyment will go down. No, it's not rival. So national defense is a public good. Then there's the other, so that only is one but not the other. So there's common resources that's not excludable, but rival in consumption. So for example, if there's a forest with deer in the forest is a common resource because we cannot exclude people from consuming this. Anybody can hunt the deer in the forest. But if I hunt down one deer, then you cannot have the same deer. Actually, there were a lot of deers in Taiwan like 100 years ago, but they all went extinct because there were too many people hunting for the leather of the deer. So that would be a good example of common resources that got overused because it's not excludable. Then there's the other flip side, which is a club's good, which is excludable but not rival in consumption. So for example, cable TV. If you watch cable TV, it does not affect your neighbor also watching cable TV. But if you don't pay the cable TV company, the cable TV company can disconnect your cable and so that you cannot watch it. So it's excludable. I can stop people from using it because I can cut your cable, but it's not rival in consumption. I mean, the socially optimal or the lowest cost is everybody enjoying it because you watching the cable TV does not lower other people's happiness for watching cable TV. Okay, so let's try this exercise. So fish in a private pond, is it rival or not? Is it excludable or not? Versus fish in the ocean, is it rival or not or excludable or not? Then how about a specific research on cholesterol-lowering drug for which a patent can be obtained? Is this rival or not or excludable or not? And lastly, basic research on lifestyle and cholesterol levels. Is it rival or not or excludable or not? All right, so let's join the quiz. So fish in the private pond, rival or not or excludable or not? And of course, depending on your answer, it will be either private good, that's rival and excludable, or common resources, which is rival but not excludable, or club good, which is not rival but excludable, or public good, which is not rival and not excludable. Okay, so most of you say it's a rival and excludable private good, and it is. Next one, fish in the ocean, rival or not, excludable or not? So again, is it private good, common resource, club good, or public good? Okay, so most of you say it's rival but not excludable, so it's a common resource, and it is. Then specific research on cholesterol-lowering drugs for which patent can be obtained. Rival or not, excludable or not. So specific research on a cholesterol-lowering drug. but patents can be obtained. So is this rival or excludable? Depending on your answer, is it a public goods, common resource, club goods, or public good? So most of you say it's not rival, but excludable, so it's a club good, and it is. Lastly, basic research on lifestyle and cholesterol levels. Is it rival or not, and is it excludable or not? And of course, depending on your answers, it could be a public good, which is not rival, not excludable, or a club good, which is excludable, but still not rival, or common resources, which is not excludable, but rival, or both excludable and rival, which is a private good. So most of you say it's a public good that's not rival and not excludable, and that is the right answer. So let's look at these 4 different goods. So fish in a private pond, it's rival, because if I take in this fish, then other people cannot enjoy it. But it's also excludable because it's my private pond. So it's a private good. Fish in the ocean, again, it's still rival in consumption, but now it's in the ocean where I cannot exclude other fishermen from fishing it. So it's a common resource. So it's not excludable. Specific research on cholesterol-lowering drugs for which a patent can be obtained. So this is not rival because if this research is conducted, we know that this drug is helpful or not effective in terms of lowering cholesterol. But because there's a patent, so I can exclude people who don't buy from me from using this drug. So it's not rival, but excludable. So it's a club good. Finally, basic research on lifestyle and cholesterol levels. So this is basic knowledge. So it's not rival in consumption. Once it's discovered, then anybody can enjoy this discovery. And it's also not excludable because once it's discovered, it's published, it's made known, well, you cannot force other people to unlearn this. If this is discovered, it's made known, then it's known. So it's a public good. All right, so now let's think of a trick question. What is a road? A road is which of the 4 kinds of goods? Is a road a private good, a public good, a club good, or a common resource? This is a trick question because it depends on whether the road is congested or not and whether it's a toll road or not. So you should consider different cases. So, okay, so here's the quiz. A road is which of the 4 kinds of good? Private good, common resource, club good, or public good, or none of the above. And note that you can make more than one answer. We have a lot of different answers, and the answer is all 4 of them. So if you got all 4, no, actually, I think any of the answers will get a point. But okay, so the key thing is this. Is a road rival in consumption? It is only if it's a congested road, because if it's congested, then more cars on the road, you're going to reduce the happiness or the utility for other people using the road. Is it excludable? Well, if it's a toll road, then it's excludable. So there are actually 4 different possibilities. If you have an uncongested non-toll road, for example, if you go on Roosevelt Street at midnight, it's uncongested, it's not a toll road, so it's a public good. But if you go to an uncongested toll road, if you go on the highway on midnight, well, you have to pay, but it's uncongested, so it doesn't matter. It's a club good. But if it's congested, non-toll road, So like the Roosevelt Road during rush hour, then it's a common resource. So it's rival in consumption, but it's not excludable. But if you have a congested toll road, like the highway during, like, say, the Moon Festival or the New Year's holiday vacation, then it's a private good because it's rival in consumption, but you have to pay, so it's also excludable. One thing I do not understand is that the Taiwanese government actually tries to have the highway to become toll-free during long weekends and vacation, and it makes it a congested non-toll road, which is a common resource. So no wonder it's just so crowded. They should just raise the price to use the highway during these peak times to solve the congestion problem. But yeah, apparently people don't do that. Okay, here's a survey question. Congestion pricing. In general, using more congestion charges in crowded transportation networks, such as higher tolls during peak travel times in cities, and peak fees for airplane takeoff and landing slots, and using the proceedings to lower taxes would make citizens on average better off. Agree or disagree? And do you think economists agree or disagree with this statement? So, okay, the first one is the poll. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? In general, using more congestion charges in crowded transportation networks, such as higher toll during peak travel times in cities, and peak fees for airplane takeoff and landing slots, and using the proceeds to lower other taxes would make citizens on average better off. So here we see that a lot of people agree, but some people are still not sure. That's fine. It's okay to disagree. Now, the real prediction question is the quiz. Do economists agree or disagree? 100% agree, 50 to 99% agree, 1 to 49% agree, 0% agree, or don't know. Because the panel has actually surveyed economists, so there is a correct answer to this question, which is based on the survey results that's actually conducted. Okay, so let's look at your answers. Let's see. So the majority of you said 50 to 99%. The economists agree, and that is indeed the answer. So here's the percentage. 98% of the economists surveyed agree on this statement on congestion pricing. 2% not sure, nobody disagrees. Okay, the key issue for these goods is not excludable goods. So public goods and common resources, these are the two topics of this chapter. And the issue for these, the common characteristic of these two goods is they're both not excludable. And that's the problem. And the problem is because I cannot exclude people, I cannot prevent you from using these goods, even if you don't pay. That's the problem. So the whole problem here is that there are people that don't pay but still enjoy it. And here, what that means is that you create externalities because there's no price. Well, the pricing problem here is that I cannot force you to pay. And you say, I don't want to pay. Then I cannot force you to pay, and that's causing the problem. And so because of this, private decisions about consuming and producing these goods would be inefficient. That's the whole problem for this. And it comes from the fact that you can consume and not pay. Or, I cannot exclude you from paying. And so for people who consume and not pay, these we call these free riders. You enjoy the benefit, but you don't pay. And so because public goods are not excludable, so there are these people who can enjoy it and refuse to pay, that's a problem. You have the incentive to become free riders. I'm not sure if you have this issue in other classes. The reason why the homework here is not group homework is because there'll be free riders, right? You spend all the time answering the homework questions, and then your classmate just puts scientist's name on the homework and enjoys the homework grade. That's an issue. And of course, this will prevent the private market from supplying this good correctly, and so it's traditionally what we call market failure. or what I think is, it's a failure because there's a lack of the market. You don't have this market. Okay, so here's an example of this. You and your neighbor, about 100 people, would love to have a water fountain in the neighborhood park. Each of you values having the fountain at 2,000 NT dollars. The neighborhood association finds a construction firm that will build the fountain for 140,000 NT dollars. A hat is passed around for the contribution, but once the money is collected, there's only 60,000 NT dollars collected. So should the fountain be built? And what happened? Will the fountain be built or not? And can the government help build the fountain? And how? How is that possible? Okay, so let's join the quiz. So should the fountain be built? You and your neighbors, 100 people, each value the fountain at 2,000 NT dollars. And the cost for building this is 140,000 NT dollars. So should the fountain be built? Yes, because the benefit exceeds the cost, or no, because the benefits cannot justify the cost, or none of the above. Okay, so let's look at your answers. The majority of you said yes, the benefit exceeds the cost, and that is the answer. Next one, will the fountain be built or not? Yes, because there is sufficient funding to build the fountain, or no, since there is insufficient funding to build the fountain, or don't know. So the majority said no, since there's insufficient funding to build the fountain, and that is the correct answer. Now, the real question is what happened? Can the government help build the fountain, and how? So, okay, so this is an open question, so you can type in your answers here. Oh, by tax revenue. Good suggestion. Free rider problem. Use the money from tax. Now, tax people who haven't paid. Or donation. Yeah, the free rider problem is the key thing. Yeah, in this scenario, there was already a donation. During a town hall meeting, there was a hat that was passed on for everybody to donate, but only 60,000 NT dollars was raised, so that's a problem. Okay, so we see a lot of answers here. The government can tax each neighbor for $1,400, and that would make it. Oh, corruption, that's a problem, yeah. A BOT, that's also possible, yes. Okay, so yeah, so should the fountain be built? Yes, because the benefit, which is 200,000 NT dollars, exceeds the cost, which is 140,000 NT dollars. But what happened was there's a free rider problem here that people don't pay, because if the fountain is built, you cannot exclude me from entering the park to enjoy the fountain. But why should I pay? I mean, yeah, so there's incentives to free ride. And because only 60,000 NT dollars was collected from this free donation, so too bad, the fountain cannot be built by the community. Question, can the government help, and how? And of course, as one of your colleagues pointed out, the government could simply tax everybody $1,400 to fund that fountain. And because taxation is enforced, so there won't be a free rider problem. So, okay, so with the public goods, the government can try to remedy the free rider problem if the total benefit of the public good exceeds the cost. And so we already see this example that, so the government can provide the public good and pay for it through tax revenue. And because taxation is enforced, it's mandatory, so the government can do this, and everybody's better off. And of course, the main issue here is how do you measure the benefit for this public good? What's the benefit to have a fountain in the community? Well, if you ask me, I would say great, right? I mean, it's going to bring in like tons of benefits. Sightseeing will increase and so on. But is that true? Well, you see a lot of these governmental projects that claim to have a museum or this historical site that claims to have a lot of benefit, but now it's just sitting there. 文字馆. That's a problem. So here are some examples of important public goods. National defense, very expensive. The US spends 3.7% of its GDP in 2020, 778 billion US dollars. Compared to that, Taiwan only spends 1.9% of its GDP. That's something that I think we should improve on. And so it's only 12.2 billion US dollars. I believe the Congress has just passed several special budgets to boost the national defense expenditure, at least this year and beyond. So that's a very good example of public goods. Everybody agrees that national defense is a public good that the government should provide. The other one that's also a very important public good is general knowledge. So basic research. So that's something that is a public good. When Einstein discovers relativity theory, then everybody enjoys that. The question, of course, is how much should the government subsidize this? That's always a huge debate when it comes to public policy. So because what is the benefit for, like, say, Taiwanese scientists to do these basic research? Well, I don't know. And it's the Congress that fights it out. Regarding anti-poverty policies, various policies that provide a welfare system, these are important anti-poverty policies. But reducing poverty itself is a public good. Well, okay, so in the US have these subsidies for poor families. There are food stamps that subsidizes low-income families to buy food that's essential to their family and their children. There are these governmental housing programs that make housing more affordable. And so these are also important public goods. Of course, some of the problems always arises when you think about how effective are these policies, or like, when the government is providing this housing, then nobody can get it, and so on. But the challenge here is that we ask the government to provide this public good because the private market on its own would not produce the right quantity. But you have to decide what kind of public good to provide, and also how much to provide. Even if we agree that housing is a public good that the government should provide, how many houses should the government build? Well, that's a problem. So usually we use what we call cost-benefit analysis to compare the cost and the benefit to the society for providing these public goods. So you try to estimate the total cost and the total benefit for these projects to the society as a whole and decide, because the benefit exceeds the cost, let's build this project. But the problem here is that there's no price involved. And so these estimates are just approximations. And of course, that creates some problems because they could be inaccurate. Or if the politician just says, I just want to build this, you just make up the numbers so that it looks like the benefits exceed the cost. And if that happens, then these cost-benefit analyses are just useless because it's rigged. Okay, I'm going to stop here about the public goods. Because I didn't finish chapter 11, so I will have to finish chapter 11 next Friday. We left out common resources last week, so we should continue on common resources. The key thing for common resources is they are also not excludable. In that sense, it's the same as the public goods, the situation that you have something that is not excludable. That means there will be free riders. Even if 90% of the people are good citizens, that does not mean that we can prevent the remaining 10% to free ride this common resource. So the problem here is that because of this free rider problem, firms may not want to provide common resources because people can use it without pay. And so here, what the government can try to do is to try to provide them or try to find a way to help private firms to provide this common resource. The other issue that common resource has, which is different from public goods, is that common resources are rival in consumption. What that means is that if I use this common resource, that would reduce the utility for other people using this resource. And so in addition to the free rider problem, you also have this overuse problem that the government can try to prevent happening. So overall, this entire chapter is about things that are not excludable. And so that means that there's a free rider problem, people can use it without paying, and so that's the overall issue. But the difference between public goods and common resources is that when you have common resources, you have the additional problem that it's rival in consumption. All right, so let's take a look. So there's this tragedy of commons, which is a parable about why common resources are used more than optimal or desirable. So you have this medieval town where sheep graze on common land. So there's this common land, everybody can use it, and so everybody brings their sheep to enjoy the grass. But then as the population increases, the number of sheep also increases, but the land is fixed. And so the grass starts to disappear because too many sheep are enjoying the grass. And in the end, when the grass is all gone, then you can't feed any sheep anymore. So that's the parable for the tragedy of commons. This reminds me of the grassland on campus. Well, you might see this problem that people try to tramp on the grass and enjoy having fun. But then, of course, the question is who's going to maintain the grass or to regrow the grass? That's the problem. And I do have to say that this is a parable because whether or not this actually happened is a problem. You can imagine that this problem could exist, but precisely because people understand this is a problem, you can imagine that people could try to come up with different solutions to solve this problem. So whether or not there was a true town that the grass really ran out, that's a problem. So that's why it's called a parable. But you can imagine that it's plausible that something like this could happen. And it's precisely because people are afraid that this problem would occur, so people start to find different ways to govern or to solve this common resource problem. So the issue here again is that the incentives for the private parties and the whole society are different. So the private incentives is to use the land for free, but that outweighs the social incentive that you should manage this common resources carefully. So here you have this negative externality that, so when I bring my sheep to the grassland, this is going to reduce the utility for other people using this land. So if I do not internalize this external cost, then of course I'm going to overuse. And so the private equilibrium quantity that everybody is consuming this common resources would be much higher than the socially optimal. So at some sense, this also links to chapter 10 when we talk about externalities, because it is precisely this negative externality. And remember, it's because common resources are rival in consumption. If somehow this is a public goods, then there is no negative externality, right? I mean, my consumption does not have a negative impact on other people's utility. So if that is the case, then great. But unfortunately, that's not the case. All right, so what can we do with this problem? You can imagine some kind of regulation, like you can only bring this amount of sheep per family to the grassland every day or every week or whatever. And so then you can sort of reduce the amount of usage of these common resources. So in some sense, this is very similar to what we saw in the externality chapter, where when you have negative externality, one thing you could do is by regulation. You say, oh, you cannot pollute beyond this amount, and so on. And you could also, just like when we deal with pollution, we can tax pollution. So you could try to tax sheep. So if you try to bring your sheep to this land, each time you have to pay a tax. That's another way. And well, if you want, you can even do tradable sheep grazing permits, where you can issue these permits and then have them trade. As long as you have a limited amount of permits, then again, you can also solve this problem. So, okay, so up to here you see, hey, wait a minute, all of this, you already saw this in the pollution chapter. That's right. But what you could also try to do, which is not that easy if you try to do this with pollution, is you could just make the land private property. So, I mean, well, the whole problem comes from the fact that this is common ground, this is common land, this is everybody's business, which is nobody's business. So why don't we just, I mean, how about let's just divide this land with, like, say, the 10 families in the town, and then everybody gets a small piece, and that also could solve the problem. Because if this is your land, then you can choose to prevent other people from bringing their sheep here. And also, you would not want to bring so much of your sheep to your land, because if the grass runs out, then you are the person who's going to bear the cost, because it's your land. And so, yeah, so making land private property, people would govern it, or they would manage it correctly. So, at some sense, clean air and water, that's an important common resource. Well, because if somebody's using the water, then that means other people, water usage, utility would go down. If I use this to wash my clothes, then you can't drink it, right? So that is relevant consumption. And you have, like, say, pollution, so we usually solve this through different environmental regulations, or you can do corrective taxes. Carbon tax is one of the things on the table that people talk about, and that is a good example of corrective taxes. Congested roads, that's also a common resource because you have congestion, and the more you drive during rush hours, the more congested it is, and the worse everybody's welfare. So you have that problem. And so one way to solve this problem is to try to charge the drivers for driving. And in fact, like in Taiwan, the highways, you have to pay toll to use the highway. Well, the economists would say you should actually increase this toll during peak hours. Although in Taiwan, it's the opposite. Actually, during the long weekends, the highway is toll-free for during that period. But I think recently they finally realized this is a problem, so they don't have these toll-free holidays anymore. But they should even go even further to just raise the toll during the peak hours. What they do is they have toll-free off-peak hours. So if you drive between midnight and, like, say 5 a.m., then it's toll-free. So that kind of peak load pricing, I mean, the key thing is that if you charge these corrective taxes, then things would improve. Of course, the real problem is that are we charging enough? Because the optimal taxation amount should equal to the external cost. And so likely we're not taxing enough. What you could also do is to tax on gasoline directly. But of course, when you tax gasoline, that means that you don't really distinguish between congestion or not. So even if I'm driving at midnight, well, I'm still paying the gas tax. So yeah, so in that sense, it's not directly targeting congestion per se. So yeah, it is true that because gasoline consumption has a lot of other negative externalities, like air pollution and so on, and because of that, there is a rationale for gas tax. But to control congestion, a better corrective tax will be taxing the usage of only peak hours. And of course, now because we have our e-tag system, it should be very easy, right? I mean, when a system detects like congestion, they just raise the price. Unfortunately, the Taiwanese government is not adopting this yet. All right, wildlife like fish and whales, these are also common resources because, well, it's very hard for people to prevent it from hunting these wildlife. But, well, it used to be that there are a lot of deer in Taiwan 100 years ago, but now they're all gone. So overfishing, overconsumption of these wildlife is a problem. And the oceans, that's the least regulated common resource. Yeah, there's no law there. And you really need international cooperation. If you know about the problem of pirates outside of Somalia, then you know that it's really an unregulated area. I mean, no single country has authority over the ocean. And it's very hard to enforce. I mean, even if we all agree that there shouldn't be piracy outside of Somalia, well, things still happen, right? And then you try to blame the Somalia government. They say we can't do anything about it. So it's difficult to enforce. Usually what people try to do with these wildlife is they could have hunting licenses. Like you can pay a price and so you can hunt a deer during this hunting season. And if you want, you can buy 3 licenses, so you can hunt 3 deers, and so on. So you could have these kind of licenses to solve this. And of course, you could also say you can only hunt during October to January or some kind of hunting season. That also limits the usage. And you can also say, hey, when you fish, if you find a fish that are smaller than this amount, you should actually put it back into the ocean. And the rationale there is that, because for the fishermen, if they catch these small fish, it's not worth it, because when they sell the fish, they sell it by weight, and small fish is not worth it. And if you put it back into the ocean and wait until it grows larger, then it's more worth it. So that's another way to do this. So you have all sorts of ways to try to regulate to make sure that there's no overuse of these wildlife. Okay, so this is my favorite slide because I want to introduce 2 prize winners that are related to this. The first person is Lynn Onstrom. She won the 2009 prize. She's actually a political scientist, and she is the first female to win this prize in economic science. She's actually a political scientist, but she is interested in this tragedy of commons problem. So she studies how real people manage common resources. She did this in the field through different case studies. So you could go to actual small communities or tribes and so on to look at how people actually manage these common resources, because people know there is this potential problem of the tragedy of commons. She also did experiments. So I remember seeing her responding to people's questions on the Economic Science Association mailing list, where all the experimental economists are talking about different experiments. So that's one person. The other person who 3 years later, L. Roth, won the same prize for market design. And so the idea here is that there are things that you need a market, but you don't have a market for. And so you can try to design a market. The leading example I already gave you was the kidney exchange, where you could do kidney swaps or different ways to manage the organ market, even though price control means that it's very difficult for people to exchange because people frown upon selling your organ. Al also did a lot of other research on medical intern matching or school choices and so on. So, remember, the whole problem for market failure is the lack of the market. And so figuring out how to design a market, it contributes to solving this problem. All right, here's a good real-world example of this. We have a lot of social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, IG. I think now Taiwanese people use D-card. I'm not sure if you ever tried to look at things on D-card. And so one question is, how is social media a common resource? That's the first question. The second question is that, in your own experience, have you dealt with undesirable behavior of other people? And do you think that's a kind of externality or not? And then, do you think that social media providers should try to regulate user behavior? Maybe your idea is that we shouldn't regulate. That could be an answer. But you could also say, oh, yeah, we should regulate. But then the question is, how should we regulate social media behavior? All right, so let's go to this question. So is social media rival in consumption? And is it excludable? Remember last time we talked about different types of goods based on whether it's rival or not, excludable or not. So which one is social media? Okay, so it seems that the majority of you think it's a public good. It's not rival, it's not excludable. Some people think it's not rival but excludable. Few of you say it's rival but not excludable. And actually it's rival but not excludable. We do have to think about this. So can you exclude people from using social media? Actually, one good example of this is Donald Trump. So Donald Trump has been taunting people on Twitter during his rise until he was banned by Twitter. So in that sense, in the end, social media platform provider decided to ban. But until that happened, during the whole process, basically you couldn't prevent Donald Trump from tweeting some crazy things and then creating a huge backlash and so on. So in that sense, it's not excludable. Of course, in the end, well, when we decide, oh, so this person violates whatever rule that the social media provider sets up and then bans this account, then of course, then we can exclude this person. But before that happens, well, it's very hard to prevent people from posting crazy comments and saying wild things on social media. And the problem here is that if you post something and then there'll be these trolls that keep commenting crazy things, I mean, it's like stalking, right? I mean, there is negative externality for internet stalking. So yeah, so in that sense, social media is rivaling consumption because these trolls, when they post these crazy comments, that creates negative externalities to the other people. So in that sense, social media is common resources. Apparently, the majority of you do not agree with this. So let's see. So in your own use of social media, have you ever dealt with undesirable behavior of others? Do you think that's negative externality? I think this is an open question, so you can type in your answers. A no and a yes. I like this. I do the bully instead. So you're the internet troll. Oh, I see. So the no yes is that you have not faced undesirable behavior, but it is negative externality. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if there could be some, like, say, gender difference here, because you could imagine some crazy people trolling particular gender, or say, if you are transgender or if you're homosexual, then you might face some kind of discrimination or homophobia or things like that. Those are particular issues when we talk about this internet stalking or social media misuse. So that could be a problem as well. So some of you have not experienced this yourself, which I think that means you're lucky. Or maybe you're not famous enough. A lot of these issues happen to famous people because they attract these trolls or these crazy people who try to just trash whatever people or things that they see. So, but here immediately you see that regardless of you saw this experience yourself, but when something like this happens, it is some form of negative externality. Okay, so do you think the social media provider should regulate user behavior? So this is another sort of open question. If you think no, then you should give the reason why you don't think we should regulate. And if you think that they should, then you should ask the question, how should this be done? And of course, one good example for this is banning Donald Trump from all social media. I don't know. I mean, even up to now, I'm still not sure if that is the right thing to do. I mean, you can talk about censorship issues, although saying that banning now it's the former US president, but then the US president, at some sense, literally the most powerful person in the world. I mean, that could be far from what we think about censorship. But that's the whole point why we have this issue here. So there's this controversy between this freedom of speech. So how should we try to reduce negative externality that this undesirable behavior on social media is causing? But I think the key thing here is that usually some forums have what we call a moderator. So any post or any comment has to be approved by a moderator before it appears. And of course, the moderator would be the gatekeeper. Although then you ask the question, who should guard the gardeners? If you have a gatekeeper, then is he or she doing the right job? Or is he or she trying to censor opinions that against his own ideas? That could be a problem. And then, I love this. Use the China method. So of course, that's precisely the problem of trying to preserve freedom of speech. So one way is the China method, and you have the Great Firewall that just blocks everything. Everything looks like a harmonized society, but of course, that's far from what's actually happening. So there's this trade-off and fine line to walk here. But this gives you a very good example of why managing common resources is difficult. It's a problem. Yeah. All right. So one thing I do want to point out is that the fundamental problem for market failure is the lack of property rights. Who has the right to decide? So when there is no well-defined property rights, like who owns clean air, who owns the fish in the ocean, or who owns the good discussion environment on social media? I mean, the ownership is not well-defined. And so what that means is that the market outcome might not be the efficient outcome. So because you don't know who the owner is or who should be the owner, that is the problem. And so this gives the government some room to step in. If you think of this, even for private goods, it's still the same thing. I mean, if my iPhone is stolen by somebody else, I can sue that person. I can go to the police station. So the government will enforce my property rights to this iPhone and get it back to me, or to punish the thief or the pirate, or things like that. So similarly here, the government could also try to define property rights and then enforce them so that the markets can work. That's why I always say that market failure is really not the failure of the market, but it's the failure for not having a market. And of course, the government could also try to regulate private behavior directly. And of course, we talked about this in the pollution part as well. You can tax pollution. What also you could do is you can say, how about this? Let's tax everybody and use this money to provide this good that the government cannot provide. So here you see that property rights is a key issue and the government can try to step in. It does not mean that the government can always do a good job. One good example of this you just discussed is who should govern social media behavior. There's a lot of issues about freedom of speech, and also, I mean, whether or not banning Donald Trump is the right thing to do could have very divided views among different people. Okay, now here's the last example. So while watching a nature documentary, you find that, so Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda have made it illegal to kill elephants and sell their ivory. Botswana, Malawi, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, they allow people to kill elephants, but only on their own property. So question, let's talk about elephants and chickens. How is an elephant like a chicken? How are they different? Which is going extinct, elephants or chickens? And how is it possible to turn an elephant into a chicken? I mean, if you think about environmental protection, that's the key problem. And where is the elephant population increasing? All right, so how is an elephant like a chicken? Or think about what good is an elephant? Is it rival in consumption or not? Is it excludable or not? Yeah, and so on. Bigger chicken, yeah. Yeah, maybe I should have changed this to dinosaurs, because do you know what? More and more dinosaurs are known to have feathers. And so it's literally a big chicken. Yeah. That's one of my surprises. I mean, I remember in my biology classes where dinosaurs were all like reptiles, but now almost all of the dinosaurs that you can name actually are known to have feathers. Anyway, why am I talking about dinosaurs? Yeah, okay. So the key thing is that if I kill an elephant, then other people will not be able to enjoy this wildlife. And similarly, if I eat this chicken, then you cannot eat the same chicken. So yeah, too bad, I'm giving away this answer, but yeah. So is chicken rival in consumption, and what about elephants? Your answer is correct. So both chickens and elephants are rival in consumption. And so is chicken excludable? What about elephants? Okay, so the majority of you say that only chicken is excludable, but elephants are not. Yeah, and in some sense, that's precisely the problem, because elephants are wild lives that run here and there, but most chickens are grown in a confined area. or in these farms and so on. So, and of course, that is the main difference between common resources and private good. And so which is going extinct? Elephants or chickens? Okay, so let's see your answers. The majority are saying, yeah, the whole problem is elephants are going extinct. Chicken is, they're going to live until the end of the world. Here's the open question. How is it possible to turn an elephant into a chicken? That's the key issue here. And this is the open question, so you can type in your answers. Yeah, ownership, yeah, make it excludable. Ask KFC, good answer. And throw them in a cage, yeah. Elephant farming, make them one's property. Oh, I love this. Doraemon would solve this problem, or magic would solve this problem. The key thing here is that if you remember, the whole story here is about 3 countries who have this problem that even though they ban elephant hunting, but elephants are being hunted and they're going extinct. But 4 other countries say that you can hunt, but only on your land. And the key thing here is that although you cannot really assign ownership to the elephants themselves, you could assign the land ownership, and you know that. So if you have a huge piece of land, what you really want to do is to try to nurture a group of elephants so that you could hunt them reasonably to harvest the ivory and to make a business out of this. You would not want to hunt all of them and then you're done. It's like the goose and the egg problem. You should try to nurture the goose so that you get a golden egg every day. So the fun thing here is that directly regulating or banning elephant hunting is not really working here in Africa. And what you need instead is a different approach, even though it's seemingly it's like, hey, why can we allow people to kill elephants on their own land? Well, but that's how you can turn elephants into chicken. So I went through this. Where is the elephant population increasing? And it's the place where people are trying to solve this problem by assigning property rights and then let the market work. All right, so to summarize the whole chapter, we talked about 2 characteristics of products. One is excludable or not, and rival in consumption or not. And then using this, we could divide this to be private goods, public goods, and then in between we have club goods, and the last thing we talked about today, common resources. And here, this chapter is about public goods and common resources. And the common issue is it's not excludable. That means that, so there's a free rider problem because I cannot exclude people who don't pay from consuming this good. And yeah, so the first one is public goods. Yeah, so you have this problem. And then the government can try to solve this problem by, say, providing this public good and taxing everybody. Similarly, common resources, it's even worse because it's rival in consumption, in addition to the excludable problem. And of course, the government can try to limit the usage and solve this problem. So here's my 1-page summary. Excludable versus rivalness. And so you have public goods, that's not excludable and non-rival. And you have common resources, which is not excludable and rival. So yeah, both of these are problematic. And the key issue is not excludability. So you have this lack of market failure. And of course, the foundation of this is because we don't know who owns it. Nobody owns the elephants that are running around. Nobody owns clean air, clean water, and that's the problem. So here's the homework from the textbook, and here are the past midterm questions. Okay, so now, why is social media rival in consumption? Yeah, the key thing here is whether or not you experience these trolls. Well, I mean, if you've never experienced internet stalking, you must be very lucky. A lot of people find this a problem. And of course, if you're a troll yourself, please stop providing negative externalities. It's really not a pleasant experience if you ever experienced that. So maybe this is a problem only for people who were harassed on social media. So rivalry means externality. So because it's rival in consumption, so my consumption will reduce other people's utility for consuming it. But it's negative externality because it's either common resource or public good, because I cannot exclude other people from using it. I mean, if this is a private good, well, of course, I bought my hamburger or I bought my lunch and I eat it, right? I mean, where is the externality? There isn't. But the problem actually comes from, it's actually not really about rivalry. It's really about I cannot exclude people from consuming this with me. So the tragedy of common comes because this is a common grassland and I cannot block other families from using this grass. So it's really because I cannot exclude people and because their consumption is going to cause some problem, right? I mean, their consumption is going to cause my utility of consuming this to go down. And so that's why you have negative externality. Similarly, if you think of public goods, I still have the excludability problem, so I cannot prevent people from enjoying national defense, even though he's a traitor. But that does not create negative externality to me in terms of consumption because it's a public good. However, it does have a problem that nobody wants to provide the public good because you can't charge people for that. But you don't have the overusage or the consumption problem. So it's really because it's not excludable but also rival in consumption that you're having this negative externality. Okay, so does rivalry of a resource not only depend on quantity reduced but also the quality of the product? Yeah, we haven't really talked about product quality yet. We will get to that at the second half of the semester. But in general, yes. Okay, this is a good question. Is the rivalry is limited to those that have bad experience on social media? Does that mean for the rest of us it's a public good? Yeah, we didn't really talk about different experience on social media, but there's another issue. There are certain forums that have very high quality discussion on various different topics. You can think of, there could be a Python discussion group where people throw out their programming problems, and then there are these Python gods, experts of programmers that try to help out these newcomers. That is a very good environment and a very high quality discussion. But then if somebody comes in and starts to like trash Donald Trump, and so on, and then all of a sudden the entire discussion environment is affected. And of course, what that could do is that actually reduces everybody's happiness or experience of using this forum. So even if you're not the people who are affected by, say, internet stalking, there could be these kind of experiences that I used to go to which group, but nowadays I decided to unsubscribe because it's all trash talk now. So there's also something like this that was affecting everybody. Yeah, one good example of this is there is actually an economic job rumor blog that people post rumors about or discuss things about the job market for econ PhDs. But then people start to bash different schools or talk about a lot of crazy things. In the end, actually somebody told me that he thinks that the whole rumor blog, the only function is to create stress for job market candidates because it's just so depressing to read those posts. I don't know, maybe you're not affected by this. I mean, if you're Ellsberg, maybe you're not affected, so yeah. Okay, so I still don't understand why social media is rival good. I think the key thing is that if somebody's post or somebody's social media behavior would affect other people's utility for consuming the social media, then it's rival in consumption. That's the definition for rivalry. Okay, can we say that fresh air is rival since smoking can cause negative externality? Yeah, so clean air is rival in consumption because if a factory pollutes the air or if I'm smoking next to you, then I'm polluting the air around you, then yeah, so that will reduce your utility for breathing this fresh air. So in that sense, it is rival in consumption. And of course, because property rights about clean air is not well defined, you would have this negative externality problem. A negative post or comment on social media doesn't limit other people from being able to post a comment. Yeah, so the key thing here is it's not the posting itself, it's the consumption of social media. I'm not sure the percentage of time that you spend reading social media versus typing or texting your comments. I mean, of course, some of you might be just keep taking pictures and then posting, never reading other people's comments. But from my understanding, when researchers study social media behavior, reading or looking at other people's pictures or comments, pressing like or dislike or mad or sad and expression, that is actually majority of the social media consumption. So it's not really about my post preventing other people from posting or commenting. It's about, because suppose I'm a sexist and I try to trash women on social media, and if you're a woman, then of course you reading those comments, that's really a bad experience. Yeah. And of course, if I'm not against gender, but I'm against you, and I try to bash you, then of course you can have a similar issue as well. Actually, it's not only limited to these things. It could also be that if everybody is posting nice pictures and how lovely my girlfriend or boyfriend is and so on, it could also create this peer pressure. And it's like, oh no, I just broke up. But look, everybody on Facebook is so happy and so successful. And then I feel depressed. It could also be something like that. So it's not that easy. Aren't these kind of opinions too subjective? Yes. The whole point is that it is subjective. I mean, if I post my lovely photo with my lovely family, yeah, for some people it could become peer pressure, but for other people it could be good. All right, and then can different experience and situation create different consumption of goods? Yeah, that's right. So in that sense, social media is very complicated. So there is a reason why there's an entire field of research trying to analyze social media. We haven't even got into like fake news yet. I mean, really going through social media is like opening up a can of worms. I mean, there's really a lot to talk about that's beyond the scope of this simple idea of common resources.